The deep void of space stretched endlessly before the research vessel, the Helios, a lone human outpost drifting at the edge of the Andromeda expanse. Captain Darius Kane stood on the bridge, his fingers tapping restlessly against the console as the dull hum of the ship filled the silence. It had been another routine cycle of scanning the abyss, searching for anomalies, but nothing ever changed in this forsaken corner of the galaxy. The stars blinked distantly, cold and indifferent, as if mocking the insignificance of the tiny human ship. Then, without warning, the quiet was shattered. A signal, faint and distorted, flickered into existence on the communication array. The crew sprang into action, their eyes locked onto the screens as the fragmented transmission struggled to take form. Static crackled through the speakers, but beneath the interference, a voice, weak and desperate, emerged. "They found us. Help." And then silence. A chill ran through the bridge as everyone processed what they had just heard. It was impossible. The signal bore an unmistakable Terran encryption code, one that had not been used for over 200 years. Kane's breath caught in his throat as he checked the transmission's origin. HFY IV, a colony long thought to be lost. Records showed that the settlement had gone dark centuries ago, presumed wiped out during humanity's early expansion wars. No distress calls had ever come, no survivors had ever been found. And yet here it was, proof that someone had endured. But how? And more importantly, who had found them? His hands moved instinctively as he ordered the signal to be cleaned and enhanced, but no further details could be extracted. Whoever had sent the message had been cut off before they could say more. That alone told Kane everything he needed to know. This was no accident. Something had silenced them. Something was still out there. A cold dread settled over the crew as they realized what this could mean. If there were survivors on HFY IV, then humanity had failed them, left to fend for themselves, abandoned by the very people who were supposed to protect them. These colonists had been forgotten by history. But if they were only reaching out now, it meant their enemy had returned. The idea sent a ripple of unease through the ship. The Andromeda expanse had been marked as a dead zone for a reason. Too many expeditions had gone in. Too few had come out. Kane could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Protocol dictated that he report the signal to Terran High Command and await further orders. But command was slow. It would take weeks, maybe months, for the bureaucrats in the core worlds to even acknowledge the message. By then, it would be too late. The enemy, whoever they were, would finish what they had started. Kane clenched his jaw. No, he wouldn't let that happen. If High Command refused to act, then he would force their hand. His mind raced through the possibilities, seeking an answer that could turn the tide. And then it hit him. There was one option left, but it was a dangerous one. A secret whispered only in the darkest corridors of Terran military history. A failsafe buried so deep in classified archives that most believed it was nothing more than a myth. The Eclipse Fleet, an armada of warships built in humanity's most desperate hour, sealed away when peace had been declared, hidden in the void where no one could find them. Designed to be awakened only in the gravest of circumstances, the fleet had become the stuff of legends, a ghost story among spacers. Some said it had been decommissioned. Others believed it had never existed at all. But Kane had read the old reports. He knew better. And if there was even a chance that the Eclipse Fleet still slumbered in the darkness, then it was time to wake them up. His hands flew across the console as he bypassed security locks and accessed an encrypted relay channel, one that had not been used in over 2 centuries. The ship's AI hesitated, warning him that unauthorized transmissions of this nature were considered an act of treason. Kane ignored it. Lives were at stake. If the distress signal was real, then waiting for permission would only doom the survivors of HFY IV. With a final keystroke, he sent the emergency activation code into the depths of the Sol system. The message was simple, containing only the signal logs and a single directive: human colony under attack. Eclipse Fleet activation authorized. Then there was nothing left to do but wait. The crew exchanged uncertain glances. No one spoke, but the weight of what had just happened was clear on their faces. If the Eclipse fleet still existed, then something beyond their understanding was about to unfold. If it did not, then they had just sent a desperate call into the void, hoping for ghosts to answer. Minutes passed, then an hour. And then, deep within the ship's comm array, something stirred. A response. A frequency so ancient it had nearly been forgotten by the modern systems. Kane's breath caught as a new signal emerged, carrying an encryption older than any living human. The display flickered, struggling to process the incoming data, and then the message appeared. Not in words, not in sound, but in a pulse of raw, encoded energy, a heartbeat. Kane's eyes widened as the realization hit. They had awakened something. Something vast. Something waiting. The Eclipse fleet was real. And now, it was coming. Deep within the icy darkness of the Sol system, beyond the reach of prying eyes, a hidden force lay dormant. The Eclipse fleet, humanity's most powerful yet forsaken armada, had been sealed away centuries ago, buried under layers of security, forgotten by all but a few. It had been created in a time of desperation, when the survival of humanity had balanced on a knife's edge. The war that birthed it had ended long ago, and with it, the need for such a force had faded. Until now, a signal, ancient and urgent, rippled through the void, reaching into the heart of the forgotten fleet. The pulse was weak but unmistakable, a distress call, a plea for salvation. And the sleeping giants, silent for centuries, began to stir. Within the vast expanse of the Orc cloud, concealed behind layers of sensor-disrupting asteroids and artificial distortions, the first warship came to life. It was a behemoth, a relic from another era, built before humanity had fully understood its own potential. Its hull, black as the abyss, absorbed light rather than reflected it, as if the ship itself was a shadow in space. Deep within its core, an ancient AI system processed the incoming message, cross-referencing it with forgotten military protocols. The encryption matched. The authorization was valid. The order was clear. Across the fleet, dormant power cores hummed as they reawakened. Engines, silent for centuries, roared back to life. The Eclipse fleet was no longer a ghost story. It was real. And it was awake. Admiral Elias Voss opened his eyes to darkness, his mind sluggish from the effects of cryosleep. He had been one of the last commanders to enter the deep freeze, placed into suspended animation alongside the fleet he had once led. His final orders had been simple: sleep until the day humanity needed them again. He had never expected to wake up. As the chamber lights flickered on, flooding the room with sterile white light, he took a slow breath, feeling the stiffness in his limbs. The ship's AI had already begun feeding him information, uploading decades of lost history into his mind. Humanity had moved on. The wars that once threatened their existence had ended. A new era of expansion had begun. And yet, here he was, being brought back to life by a distress call from the far reaches of space. Something had gone wrong. And if the Eclipse fleet had been activated, it meant the threat was greater than anything the modern Terran Navy could handle. His boots echoed against the steel floor as he stepped onto the bridge of the TSS Revenant, his personal command ship. Around him, the crew was emerging from their own cryopods, awakening from their long slumber. Some looked disoriented, their bodies still adjusting, while others moved with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had trained for this moment long before they had been frozen. The fleet's eye, a cold and calculating entity known as ZUS, greeted him with a monotone report. Admiral Voss, you are now operational. Fleet status: 78% of vessels fully reactivated. Remaining ships will reach combat readiness within the next 8 hours. Orders. Voss exhaled, running a hand through his short, silver-streaked hair. Show me the distress signal, he ordered. A holographic display materialized before him, replaying the weak, fragmented transmission from Ephera IV. The voice was barely audible beneath the static, but the message was clear. Someone was alive out there. Someone who should have been dead centuries ago. And worse, they were under attack. He clenched his fists as the reality of the situation settled in. The fleet had been called for one reason: war. Within minutes, the Eclipse fleet was fully operational, each warship checking in, their systems running diagnostics at lightning speed. These were not ordinary ships. Each vessel was a technological marvel, designed to fight and win wars against impossible odds. While modern Terran fleets had focused on diplomacy, trade, and defense, the Eclipse fleet had been built for one purpose: extermination. It carried weapons that had been deemed too destructive, tactics that had been deemed too brutal. But humanity had locked away these weapons with the belief that they would never need them again. That belief had been a mistake. Voss's voice was calm but commanding as he issued his first order in over 200 years. Prepare for immediate jump. All ships, set course for HFY IV. Maximum speed. Across the fleet, hyperspace drives powered up, massive engines pulling energy from artificial singularities. The ships did not move through normal space. Instead, they tore open reality itself, disappearing into the void. The journey would take mere hours, a fraction of the time it would take for a modern fleet to arrive. The Eclipse fleet was no longer a relic. It was a storm, coming to erase whatever threat had dared to rise again. As the ships raced toward their destination, Voss studied the tactical data being fed to his console. HFY IV was supposed to be a dead world. If survivors remained, then something had kept them hidden for centuries. And if they were only reaching out now, it meant their enemy had either been patient or had just returned. His thoughts darkened as his mind pieced together the possibilities. The last recorded enemy in that region had been the Draknir Dominion, a ruthless species that had once waged war against humanity. They had been thought wiped out, but war had taught him one brutal truth: enemies were never truly gone. They always found a way back. A sudden alert flashed on the screens, drawing his attention. The deep space probe, sent ahead of the fleet, had just transmitted its findings. The data was horrifying. The colony was in ruins, its structures scarred by heavy orbital bombardment. Wreckage of alien war machines littered the surface, but there were no bodies, human or otherwise. Something had taken them, or something had erased them. A cold fury settled in his chest as he stared at the images. Whoever had done this was about to learn a lesson humanity had taught the galaxy long ago. The Eclipse fleet had been humanity's last resort, built for wars that had no mercy, no negotiation, no retreat. And now it was coming. Voss's voice was steady as he transmitted his final order to the fleet before the battle. No survivors among the enemy. Let the galaxy remember why humanity was once feared. The stars stretched and twisted as the fleet emerged. The transport ship Argus 7 emerged from hyperspace, its massive frame drifting silently toward the planet below. HFY IV lay in eerie stillness, its surface bathed in the pale glow of its dying sun. From orbit, the colony looked intact. Its towering buildings, industrial complexes, and massive agricultural domes, all standing as if time had frozen. Yet there was something deeply wrong. There were no lights, no movement, no transmission signals. It was as if the entire population had vanished overnight. Captain Jonas Vex narrowed his eyes at the sensor readings on his console. The colony had once housed over 500,000 people. Now it was silent. No distress signals, no emergency beacons, just emptiness. The silence was unnatural, suffocating. It sent a shiver down his spine. The ship's AI, Sable, ran another deep scan, but the results remained the same. No life signs detected. No power sources active. Structural integrity of the colony remains intact. The words only deepened the mystery. If there had been an attack, there would be evidence. Wreckage, radiation signatures, craters. But there was nothing. The colony wasn't destroyed. It was simply abandoned. Vex exhaled sharply, glancing at his crew. Lieutenant Mirahos, his second in command, was already suited up, her fingers tightening around the grip of her sidearm. Dr. Elias Rook, the team's scientist, adjusted his equipment with a mix of curiosity and unease. Even the hardened Sergeant Cal Briggs, a veteran soldier who had seen countless battles, looked unnerved. The drop shuttle descended, cutting through the thick atmosphere, landing in the heart of the colony. The air was breathable, the gravity normal. But the silence was overwhelming. They moved cautiously, weapons ready, their boots echoing through the deserted streets. Vehicles stood abandoned in the middle of roads. Food sat untouched on tables inside homes. It was as if the colonists had simply stood up one day and walked away. The eeriest part was the lack of decay. There were no signs of rot, no scavengers, no bodies. Just an empty city, perfectly preserved in its last moment of life. Briggs' voice crackled through the comms. "This isn't right, Captain. People don't just vanish." He gestured toward a marketplace, where stalls were still stocked with goods. The artificial sky dome overhead was still functioning, casting a soft glow over the abandoned shops. Vex nodded grimly, his instincts screaming that they were not alone. "Stay sharp. Something happened here. We need to find out what." They moved toward the colony's command center, the only place that might still have records of what had transpired. The doors slid open with a metallic hiss, revealing an empty control room lined with inactive screens. Dr. Rook activated a terminal, bypassing security protocols to access the colony's last recorded logs. As the files loaded, distorted audio filled the room. A woman's voice, panicked and breathless, echoed through the speakers. "We are not alone. They are inside." "They air." The transmission cut off abruptly. A chill ran through Vex's spine. Haas muttered, "Inside." "Inside where?" Rook's fingers flew over the console. "I'm pulling up security footage." The screen flickered to life, showing grainy black and white footage of colonists walking through the streets. Everything seemed normal, until it wasn't. The people began to stop, their heads tilting unnaturally, as if listening to something unheard. Then, one by one, they turned and walked away. Not in a panic, not in a hurry, just walking, disappearing into the shadows, leaving everything behind. The footage played in silence, and then nothing. No further records, no alarms, just emptiness. A sudden static noise filled the room, making the team tense. It was coming from their comms. "Did you hear that?" Briggs whispered, his grip tightening on his rifle. Vex nodded. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but there was something in the static. A whisper, a presence. They weren't alone. Then the lights flickered. Not the harsh flickering of a failing system, but something more. Intentional. As if something was watching them, manipulating the very fabric of the station. Mira's breath hitched as she pointed toward the glass window. "Look!" Outside, in the dark streets of the colony, shadows moved. Silhouettes, barely visible against the dim glow of the artificial sky, shifting without sound. Not running, not attacking, just watching. Briggs raised his weapon. "I don't like this." Vex made a snap decision. Back to the ship. Now. They moved quickly, their boots pounding against the metallic floor, the eerie silence pressing in around them. As they stepped outside, the streets changed. Where once there had been stillness, there were now footprints in the dust. Fresh ones. And they were not alone anymore. The shadows moved again, no longer standing still. They were closer now. Their sprint toward the shuttle became a desperate race. The feeling of being watched turned into something worse, being followed. The comms flared again, static surging with half-formed whispers. Rook gritted his teeth. "The signal is artificial. It's..." His words were cut off as the ship's emergency beacons suddenly activated on their own. Red warning lights bathed the colony in an eerie glow, and for the first time, they heard something other than their own footsteps. A whisper. Soft. cold, right behind them. Vex turned, raising his weapon, but there was nothing there. Nothing visible. Briggs fired a warning shot into the air, the gunfire echoing through the streets, but it did nothing. The whispers grew louder, swirling through the air like a storm. Mira gasped. "Captain, they never left." Her voice was almost lost beneath the noise. "The colony, they're still here." Vex understood too late. The colonists hadn't died. They hadn't fled. They had become something else. And now, whatever had claimed them was turning its gaze toward the newcomers. "Get to the ship," he barked. They ran, the whispers now a deafening roar, the air itself thick with an unseen presence. The shuttle doors slammed shut behind them as they staggered inside, gasping for breath. The engines flared to life, lifting them off the ground, tearing them away from the cursed colony below. But as they rose, Mira's voice came in a whisper of her own. "They let us go." Vex turned sharply. "What?" She met his gaze, her face pale. "They could have taken us. They wanted us to see." The ship punched into orbit, breaking free of the ghostly world below. But as they left, their sensors picked up a new signal. Not a distress call, not a warning. A message. One word. "Come back." The vast emptiness of space was deceiving. For decades, it had remained silent, lifeless, untouched by conflict. But silence was never peace. It was just the pause before the next war. And now, that silence was about to be broken. Deep within the outer rim of the galaxy, a forgotten sector stirred back to life. Once, it had been the site of humanity's greatest war, a war that had ended in fire and death. The enemy, the Valkyrie Dominion, had been driven into the void, their fleets shattered, their empire reduced to ruins. Humanity had won, or so they had believed. Now, after 100 years of quiet, they had returned. Admiral Darius Holt stood on the bridge of the HSS Vengeance, his gaze locked onto the tactical display. The screen flickered with hundreds of red blips, Valkyrie warships, emerging from the shadows like ghosts of the past. His grip tightened around the railing. "So, it's true," he muttered. "They never died. They were just waiting." Beside him, Commander Celine Graves studied the enemy formations with cold calculation. "They didn't come back for negotiation," she said. "They came to finish what we started." The distress call had been brief. One last, desperate transmission from Outpost Helios 9, a lonely human station at the edge of the old battlefields. By the time the Vengeance arrived, there was nothing left but debris. The station had been obliterated in an instant, and the enemy had left behind only one message, broadcasted in the old war frequencies. "The last war resumes." The bridge was tense, filled with the hum of battle preparations. The HSS Vengeance was humanity's most powerful battleship, a relic of the last war, refitted and ready for combat. Around it, a fleet of warships gathered, smaller, newer, untested in battle. Against them stood an armada of Valkyrie dreadnoughts, sleek and menacing, their dark hulls absorbing the distant starlight. It was clear they had not just returned. They had evolved. "Orders, Admiral?" Celine asked. Darius took a slow breath. "We fight. We send a message of our own." The battle began with a flash of light as the Vengeance fired its main rail cannons, sending kinetic slugs tearing through the void. The first Valkyrie ships disintegrated under the impact, their hulls crushed like paper. But the enemy was fast. Plasma lances burned through the darkness, slicing through human cruisers with deadly precision. Explosions filled the battlefield as ships vanished in fire and debris. Darius barked commands, his voice steady even as the ship rocked under enemy fire. "Keep the formations tight. Do not let them break our lines." The human fleet fought with the ferocity of those who refused to lose their home again. Destroyers weaved through the chaos, launching torpedoes into the enemy ranks. Fighters darted like angry insects, engaging in brutal dogfights against Valkyrie interceptors. But the enemy was relentless. The Vengeance took a direct hit, and alarms blared across the ship. Sparks flew from control panels, the lights flickering under the strain. Shields failing. A technician shouted, "We won't last at this rate." Darius refused to retreat. This was not just a battle. This was history repeating itself. And if they failed here, there would be no stopping what came next. Then something changed. A new signal appeared on the sensors. Another fleet, larger than anything seen before. But it was not human. And it was not Valkyrie. It was something worse. Celine paled. "Admiral, we have a problem." The enemy had not just returned to fight humanity. They had been running from something else. And now, that something had arrived. The last war had just begun again. The galaxy had long whispered about the humans, about their resilience, their unpredictability, their terrifying ability to survive. Some called them a young species, reckless and foolish. Others saw them as mere anomalies, an accident of evolution that would fade with time. But few truly understood what they were, and fewer still had seen what happened when they were pushed too far. The Valfar Imperium, an ancient empire that had ruled for millennia, had made that mistake. They had thought humanity was just another species to be conquered, another world to add to their collection. They struck Earth's colonies without warning, their fleet descending like a storm, burning entire cities to ash. 12 billion humans died before the first real response came. The Valfar saw it as a victory, but they had only woken a monster. From the depths of space, the human armada came, not in anger, not in vengeance, but with a calm, calculated silence. There were no warnings, no demands, no attempts at diplomacy. Humanity had already given the galaxy one warning long ago. Do not make us your enemy. The Valfar had ignored it. And now, their homeworld, Valrathis, the jewel of their empire, was about to witness why no one ignored humanity twice. Admiral Elias Voss stood on the bridge of the HSS Nemesis, watching the enemy fleet scramble in panic. The Valfar had always been arrogant, believing in their superiority, their invincibility. That illusion shattered the moment human warships arrived in their system. Every outpost fell within hours. Every fleet they sent was annihilated before it could even react. And now, the Nemesis, humanity's most powerful dreadnought, hovered above their capital, its weapons charged and waiting. "Admiral," came a calm voice from his side. Commander Area Kane, his second in command, studied the enemy defenses with a cold expression. "They are hailing us." Elias exhaled slowly. He had expected this. He gave a small nod. "Put it through." The holoscreen flickered, revealing the desperate face of High Chancellor Valrathis, leader of the Valfar Imperium. His golden skin, once radiant with pride, was now pale with fear. Behind him, alarms blared, and his war council stood in terrified silence. "Human," Valrathis spoke, his voice trembling. We were mistaken. We see that now." Elias did not reply immediately. He let the silence linger. It was more terrifying than words. Valrathis swallowed hard. "We surrender. The Imperium will withdraw from all human territories. We will offer reparations. Please, there is no need for this destruction." A deep, quiet anger burned in Elias's chest, but his voice remained calm. 12 billion, he said softly. Valrathis flinched. 12 billion lives. Families. Cities. Children. Did they surrender when your fleets arrived? The Chancellor's hands clenched. That was a mistake. Elias's gaze darkened. "Yes," he said. "It was." The Nemesis fired. Valrathis's image vanished as the orbital bombardment began. Plasma lances struck the surface of Valrathis, leveling military installations, reducing strategic points to craters. Humanity did not kill civilians, but they ensured that the Valfar would never fight another war again. As the flames rose from the capital, a final transmission was sent from the Nemesis, not just to the Valfar, but to every major empire in the galaxy. A message, a warning. We do not seek war. We do not seek conquest, but we do not forget, and we do not forgive. Let this be the last time any species underestimates humanity. This is your only warning.